That's like a really complicated explanation, isn't it?
Is it really that important to say, is that belt or is that mix?
You're paying me. I'm here to impress you. You're not here to impress me. Getting them into that kind of abundance mindset, I suppose, and not in I think the big problem is.
First of all, I'd just like to ask, like, what has your vocal journey been? Have you always been a pop singer, or did you start did you start classical or opera? How did you start?
Yeah, so I started training when I was maybe 15 or 16, and my singing teacher was a classical vocal coach, singing teacher, and she was very inspiring, very encouraging, and I wanted to be the soprano she dreamed for me to be. And so I followed that path, and I did a Bachelor of Music in classical and a Masters, and kind of emerged out of that. I don't think I ever felt like I was on the sly, on the down low, singing Beyonce without anyone knowing. But forward facing, I was a lyric soprano. And then I started coaching singers. I started teaching and taking some students, and they wanted, at the time, Adele was really big, and they wanted to sing Adele, and I was like, I can't demonstrate that. That's not how my voice works. And I was like, oh, I don't like not being able to do something like this. I'm meant to be the singing expert here. And so I went off on my own journey of trying to figure out how to convert my voice from being a classical voice to, I never ended up kind of carving out a classical singing career. I ended up carving out a pop career after my classical degree, but I had to spend about a year converting my voice over from that classical sound.
That's so cool. Our stories are very similar, but yeah, I started when I was about 15 or 16 as well with singing lessons, and my teacher was classical, and then I moved on to music, like classical and musical theater, and I was like, what should I do? So I think that's quite, like, a lot of singers start sort of around that time, right? You sort of go, okay, I really love singing, and now I want to be a singer. Sort of around that time, you sort of start to realize that, okay, this isn't just like a bit of a hobby. I might want to do this as a career. That's really fantastic. What was one of mixed voice. This is like this huge thing. So you went from, yay. I think it's like this magical unicorn that I think a lot of people feel like, what is the mixed voice? Yeah. But I love that you started off as a classical singer. So not necessarily doing a lot of not singing any pop. And I know, was there anything that you sort of like, my singing teacher always used to get really annoyed when I would do any like really loud singing or like belting or anything like that. Was there anything that you were told when you were singing classically, like you should not do this, that maybe you do now with your pop technique?
Yeah, definitely. There was my singing voice and there was my speaking voice, and they do not exist in the same place. Like, they're different. And I mean, I really didn't even use my chest voice until my mid-20s. So I was, totally heady, soprano, light. And that was like a revelation to me that I could use, that was useful for singing, and that could be used, and it could be used in classical as well. But yeah, that was one thing that was majorly off limits, unless I was very low, unless it was like an absolute necessity for phonation, like I could use a little bit of chest. But yeah, that was mainly it. Got taught a lot in metaphors and sensation. And found it hard, all right, to pin things down, and got a very heavy emphasis on breath and finding the diaphragm.
And I was a bit lost in terms of like breath control for in terms of the actual like breathing in and thinking about the diaphragm in that way. So, but then how did you then get into, did you start training with someone to then start discovering? You said that you went in to have a look at like different courses and things like that. Was it anyone in sort of particular that sort of had that moment where you're like, okay, here's my chest voice, here's how did you find that resonance somehow? Or
yeah. So my friend, I opened a singing school with a good friend in Cork, and she had studied in London. So she recommended that her singing teacher in college was Kim Chandler. And she said, cool. You should go have a lesson with Kim. And Kim is a real character. It's like she's just a very memorable person to meet.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved her voice. I think as far as vocal coaches go in terms of like being able to demonstrate pop and know pop inside out and upside down. She knows when you haven't sung exactly every single note in that Stevie Wonder song. Like she knows every soul song inside out. And so I went over to her for a session, and she really inspired me and gave me that confidence to go for it with my chest voice. And she gave me like the task of, I just want you to be able to sing Car Wash, right, in your chest voice. And she kind of made me sing these really kind of easy chest voice songs. And I started unlocking it then through Kim. But I think that, and finding a podcast that was called it is still The Naked Vocalist, which is run by Chris Johnson, and Steve Giles. And so I came across that and I was like, who are these guys? And I emailed them, and they both hopped online and gave me a lesson. And I was like, so I had a Zoom lesson with them, and they were like, they were so brilliant. I was like, you should come to Cork. And they came over to Cork to my studio. And then they said, you should join Vocology in Practice. So then I ended up joining Vocology in Practice, and I ended up going to LA, and then all kind of stemmed from there.
Oh, that's fantastic. My goodness me, what a journey. What was one of the, but I mean, obviously it's still going, you know, I love that as well. I see with that we're doing sort of the same sort of similar courses and things like that. I think it's always about learning and continuing. I think that's awesome. What was one of the hardest things that you found with transitioning into that more pop, or even into your chest voice?
Yeah, well, I think that an analogy that kind of helps me think about it is singing classical is like cycling a bicycle, or felt like cycling a bicycle for me vocally. And then all of a sudden I got taken off that bicycle and put onto a motorbike. Mm-hmm. All right. And I was like, oh, and it's just, it's so robust. It's so loud. It's so heavy. I don't feel like I know how to slow down, speed up, control, turn, that I lost a lot of my ability to control such a powerful upgrade. Okay. And so it was really having to manage the rate of airflow now, with this new level of chord closure. And it was having to rethink a lot of the vocal track shapes that I was making, and how I was pronouncing things when I was singing. And I think starting to think more upside down about my voice. So whereas I'd always been thinking from the bottom up, so breath to vocal fold to vowel, with pop, I started thinking vowel to fold to breath. And that was a really big kind of aha for me and breakthrough for me.
That's really cool. Yeah. Vowel to vocal fold to breath. I don't think I've ever thought about it that way. Like in terms of the chain of which way you would think about the pop sound. That's really cool.
Because I felt like if I could tune the engine properly, like if I can tune the vowel, then that's going to reflect back to the vocal fold. And then that's going to talk to what the rate of airflow is doing. Of course, you need basic fundamentals of breath flow, but like, and that goes into what Ken Bozeman talks about with transglottal pressure difference. And I think that really started, I started waking up to that when straws became hot, and it was all about the straw phonation. And that was really all about balancing the pressures above and below the vocal folds, this inertance that's happening. And I was like, oh, it feels like I'm supporting my voice from the top down rather than the bottom up. And I was like, if I get the pressures right in my tract, the pressures underneath start to mirror.
That's fantastic. That's really cool. I'm gonna go away and practice then after this. I'm gonna go and play around with some vowels and things. But I love Ken's work as well. That that idea of the trumpet shape. I'd never really thought about the idea of, you know, belts and things, or mix and things like that. Thinking about this idea of actually what's going on up here. I'd done some work with Jamie Reed about the formants and looking at where the formants are in terms of that. And then, but I love that Ken even took that to go, okay, we'll have a look at then what's happening with the mouth shape. And then that's easy and necessary, you know, for some singers to kind of get a grasp on. I think that's really fun. Oh yeah. It's food for thought here. Thank you. So what do you think are some of I mean, I think that's fantastic, thinking about the way, like top to bottom rather than bottom to top in terms of the lungs and things like that, and the mouth shape. What do you think are some of the common misconceptions about mixed voice? Because I think this idea of mixed voice is often like so many singers come into the studio and they go, okay, I want to sing in this mixed voice that everyone talks about.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Because I mean, you teach with pro vocal artists, you teach a lot of pop singers. Mix is, the bread and butter of pop music. What do you think some of the biggest misconceptions are, especially when they come into the studio as new students?
Yeah, I think that it's we can't go straight there. We need to get functionality. We need to develop as much functionality in the laryngeal registers as possible. Starting with mode 1. So I want them to be able to access mode 1, a very straight ahead, like you're singing a kid's song in a speech-based level quality, and have good access to that, good agility in that. And I'm really just looking at that speaking range as well. I'm not worried about anything beyond the speaking range, but we need to, that's the foundation of the voice, of the pop voice. And so we can't move on from there to mix until that's sorted.
Yeah.
And then to build on top of that, I like them to be able to access a very true M2, so a very true mode 2, which I would define as falsetto. So that being more like a thin fold closure, more of a sound. They're most natural, not a produced head voice sound, just like a falsetto unproduced sound. And to be able to access that as high as possible. And then on top of that, I'd like them to be able to access mode 0, which is vocal fry, and then be able to go back to back so that they can go and that they have this like really good functional access to the 3 laryngeal registers. And then we start building onto, okay, now let's start acoustically manipulating mode 1 to move into mix. And so I think the next misconception is that it's just this one thing, and all the vowels should work accordingly. Like they should all work within that register on all of the pitches, and they don't take into consideration the amount of variation that occurs depending on the vowel, depending on the pitch, depending on their own vocal tract, and that it really isn't this like one destination. It's quite varied.
That's fantastic. And thinking about this idea of building up the different parts of the voice, because essentially, would you say that's what mix is a mixture? So, I mean, what would you define as being mixed? I know it's a massive thing. And I know that there's so many videos out there about what mix is, but what would you then define as being, would you say that a mix is then mode 1, I'm thinking more, you were meaning like chest voice, like thicker vocal fold, right down in that bottom part of the range. I'm sorry, I'm not as familiar with like mode 1, mode 2, but I did watch your video, which I'm going to put in the show notes, about the mixed voice, where you do go into more of a detailed explanation about what is your mix on your channel. I think it's really fantastic. And you talked about that. Would you say then it's a mix of the mode 1 and the mode 2 that you're trying to access, as you're saying, to get the acoustic properties of the mode 1 to go further up into mode 2?
Yeah. So with the mode 2 training, from my perspective, I just want them to be able to train the coordination of accessing the second layer of the vocal fold, the ligament, and the cricothyroid, which is the muscle just outside, that helps to stretch the vocal fold. So really that's like an isolation exercise to make sure that the vocal folds can stretch really nicely for me. I in my mind imagine that mix is just an acoustic treatment of mode 1. So we're still in that register of mode 1, but we're acoustically manipulating it to extend our stay in mode 1. And so for me, mix is the point where the thyroretinoid is tapping out. We've gotten to the top of how much that can do before we have to hand over to the ligament, that second layer of the vocal fold. And for that to work, we're going to have to acoustically manipulate it. And that turnover point is at a different place for every vowel for me, and it'll be different for different singers, but my E vowel will have to hand over sooner than my E vowel, than my A vowel, than my O vowel. And so it's the point where they do have to have an acoustic manipulation to maintain the perception and the quality of and the registration of mode 1.
Okay.
That's like a really complicated explanation, isn't it?
I mean, yeah, but I don't.
It's like I just heard myself back there, and I was like, there must be an easier way to explain that.
I think I definitely, I understand what you're saying. I think for maybe people who don't necessarily know what the ligament is and things like that.
Yes.
Essentially, if I'm allowed to just boil that down slightly, it's about taking your mode 1 and transitioning into mode 2, really, but keeping the acoustic properties of the mode 1 essentially as you're going, or you're trying to manipulate it, or is that incorrect?
I think so. For me, the modes are describing the vibratory pattern.
Okay.
And the vibratory pattern of mix, of belt, of chest are all the same. They all have that like connected on the voice style of pattern. So there is a quite a bit of depth of vocal fold engagement. But there is a point where the muscle dominance at the bottom layer is going to have to hand over to the ligament, but still have that layer, that level of connection. And so the registration is still mode 1, but acoustically we're having to manipulate. And so for me, mixed voice is an acoustic event in mode 1.
Yeah.
And it's an acoustic manipulation. As the vowel is starting to migrate, we're coming in and actively modifying it.
Okay, cool. I think that's a bit easier for the definitely for my brain. I'm only 2 coffees in actually thinking about it. So with the I saw you posted recently, and I will put in the show notes as well, your links to your social media, which I think is fantastic, with your voice hacks that you also teach with. I saw your recent video about Tina Turner and also Adele and things like that, and how people can kind of access through little sort of tricks and tips and things as well. I think I hate it to say tricks actually, but it is kind of like a little kind of like helping thing. I know you call them vocal tricks, but it's sort of like something that, you know, maybe works for that part, but then if people wanted to explore it more with you, then they would need to come and you know, have a lesson. But I think you were saying about the differences. I get a lot of singers coming in, they're like, I just want a belt. Like they've heard this word belt and they're just like, yeah, belt and mix. Those are just like the 2 things. I really want to sing high and loud. But I noticed, I saw that you don't necessarily say or think that there's I don't know what you think, but that there's, would you classify there as being 2 different things there? Or would you say they're sort of one and the same? I think sometimes it's quite hard to tell the difference when you're listening to singers, really.
Yeah, I know. I think because my work has been so focused on just working with artists who are writing their own music. In fact, it's entirely that. I don't have as much utility for separating those terms. So for me, I'm just always on a continuum of mix. And is it a thicker? Do we want it to be thicker or thinner or brighter or warmer or breathier or cleaner? And really, we just know we're in the transition area of the voice, and we're manipulating the acoustics and we're manipulating the sound, and we're just making some choices and kind of teaching the singer to think about their voice in this area like you have a mixing desk now, and we're going to be kind of pulling up and down different dials, different colors, different vowels, different levels of thickness at the vocal fold. So I think it's really useful for singers who are auditioning for parts in musicals, and they're told you need a belt. You need to be able to belt a C5 or blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, okay, fair enough. You're going to have to understand some of those categorizations there. But for me, selfishly, I haven't had to worry about it too much.
I think there's a huge difference between the vocal styles, isn't there? Especially with pop and musical theater. I know although musical theater is turning is turning quite poppy in a sense. I don't want to say classical in terms of like classical singing, but there is that sort of way that we hear it. We go, that is a loud, high sound that is belt. And I think with pop, I love that way that you're just saying about being a mixing desk, that it's not necessarily about having like that one note that comes out like super duper loud and like, okay, that sounds really thick and all that sort of stuff. That's a belt note. I think sometimes with pop music, it can be a little bit of a gray zone of, okay, which one is it? Does it matter? I think that's also a question. Is it really that important to say, is that belt or is that mix? I don't think, if it sounds the way it sounds and you like it, as you're saying with working with artists, does it really matter?
Yeah, totally. And I think that again, as artists, the way the conversation, and it might be the same for you, the way the conversation goes is I'm like, do you like that? What do you want more of? What do you want less of? And then we're just playing around with the options and we're auditioning different sounds. And we're like, oh, that one is our favorite. Whereas maybe for a music theater singer, and even for a singer who is like a singer for hire, you're having to kind of tick a box. You're having to get that very specific sound on that note. Whereas we have a lot more flexibility as artists, because I'm like, you reimagining the song is actually more important than you recreating the sound.
Yeah.
So let's audition different ways we can do it.
I think that's awesome. I do ask that a lot. Like, did you like that? And they're like, I don't know, Zoe, that's what I pay you for. And I'm like,
yeah. They're like, tell me it's right or wrong, please.
Tell me, please give me, like an A star or something like that. I'm like, so I think that's really important, especially for singers. Do you find that that's something that they need to get used to, like listening to their own intuition when they're doing a lot of this work?
Definitely. Like, you know when you have a student that shows up and they're nervous and they really want to make a good impression on you and they really want you to think that you're one of the best singing students you've ever had. And I'm like, you're paying me. I'm here to impress you. You're not here to impress me. And we have to like find that shift and that power dynamic. And I can never feel your voice. And I do think that it's important for them to go on a journey of understanding the vocal aesthetic that they're looking for, and also understanding what their own, like what singing feels like breathing to you. Like what is this type of, what's the way that you sing that actually just feels effortless, that you take for granted and that you're like, oh, that's only, I'm like, a lot of people would kill to be able to do what you do there very easily and naturally. And I think owning that, loving that, and then that's the home, and then we build extensions on from that. But I think getting them into that kind of abundance mindset, I suppose, and not in the, I need a belt, I need a mix, I'm missing all of these things in my voice. Let's love the home first and then extend.
Yeah. Oh, I love that idea of like, and especially I find that a lot in the studio, that the singers go, oh no, well, like singing low, it's easy, that's I don't need to do that. And I'm like, well, no, you just like, let's also sing down there. Let's enjoy that. Let's, it doesn't always have to be hard. I think that was a big light bulb moment, I think, for me, coming from like musical theater, where it's always like, okay, you have to, defying gravity. You have to just be able to belt the shit out of everything. But that was just, I just loved singing really, really out. And it is really dynamic. It feels good and it feels exciting. But I think understanding that it doesn't always have to be hard. It doesn't always have to be difficult. That I just, personally, I love taking people through that, and they're just suddenly like, whoa, okay, if I try less, maybe the sound will come out a little bit better.
Totally, every time. Yeah.
So working with singers, and especially, I know that with the pro vocal artists, you work with artists working on their own music. What do you think is one of the biggest mistakes that they start to make when they're working with their mixed voice? Things they think they've understood about mix, but maybe that were not as helpful for their mix.
Right. So I feel like the fact that I think the big problem is them thinking that it's a destination and that it doesn't have a lot of variance to it. I think managing airflow, but actually managing airflow through knowing that it's very correlated to volume, and actually training the singers literally to just stop singing loudly. I know that seems like a really crap piece of advice, but when I try to fix airflow, I'll just say, okay, let's say that was volume wise, we were at 8. Can I get volume 5? But don't change registration, don't change voice quality. And getting them to really think about that, you can see everything start to click into place. And I feel like I don't love to get too micromanagey about the moving parts unless I have to. And I prefer singers to develop their ability to hear spectrally and have like more aural intelligence and be good at imitation. I think that's probably a big, for me, from my perspective, something that can be overlooked or villainized inappropriately is like imitation. I'm like, but your brain is actually wired for imitation. You're what's called a vocal learner. This is from research by different neuroscientists. One of them in our vocal pedagogy world, her name is Heidi Maas, and she's talked about how we're one of 8 species, humans are, of vocal learners. Our brains are wired for imitation like that of a songbird. We can our tongue can find the right position, our palate can find the right position, our pharynx can, contract the right muscles if we just listen to the sound and repeat it. And so much of that. And now it will never be this perfect imitation because your vocal tract is different to mine, but you're going to get a lot more in the ballpark of the frequencies I'm looking for you to boost in the sound if you're able to really tune in and listen. And I often get singers when they're listening to singers that they admire and they're trying to get a note. I'm like, pause the note, pause the note midway through, because you'll hear that the singer is actually moving through many vowels. Even though it sounds like she's just singing on one vowel, she's actually singing mainly on another vowel and then ending it with the perceived vowel. So that vowel modification stuff is really, really helpful for them as well. And I think that can be, again, thought of as cheating. And I'm like, no, that's like the smartest thing ever, and it's not going to be a carbon copy. You're just going to get better in the ballpark of the band of frequencies. And then finally, to add to that is that it's physics. Acoustics is maths, and it's in the same way that there's a law of gravity, there's also a law of acoustics, and you can't defy it. And if you try to defy it, then your voice will flip or flip over. So you have to play ball with acoustics. There's no opting out of that. So I think that's another maybe misconception.
Oh my goodness me. I think that I love the idea of the vowel modification. I think that really definitely helped me when trying to find my mix. I think I was like you, I just sang, or like you were saying at the beginning, I basically just had my head voice just come all the way down. And to find that true chest voice, I only really started much like you in sort of like mid-20s. And I was like, whoa, it's so much easier.
Yes, I know.
And this opening up of things, but that a lot of that came through the work with the vowels and changing it, and not just thinking about classical, up and down, and thinking about everything being so open and all that sort of stuff, and changing that position. And it also came through finding, as you say, finding a teacher who could also demonstrate the sounds that I was after, and then kind of like copy them a little bit, not just listening to singers, but also finding someone who I gelled with in terms of like gelled with vocally.
Yes, I think that's so helpful, like, and being able to mirror with and I really do like Zoom for this. Because it's not weird anymore to stare at somebody's face. Whereas the way we can stare and analyze on Zoom in comparison to in a room, it would get quite intimidating and threatening. But in a Zoom call, I'm able to like really look at somebody's face and really analyze how their mouth is moving, and they're able to watch me, and we're able to watch the playback. And so many of the singers pick up the vowel modification on the playback because they're like, oh my God, you're going, ah, and I'm going, I can hear it now. And I'm like, yeah, just that little change from to is going to make all the difference for you to be able to sing that note.
Oh, I love Zoom. I think that, I was a big fan of it even before we had to go on Zoom. And I just love it that people have sort of like joined the camp now. I'm like, you see what I was talking about when I was going on about.
No.
But I think that's the challenge, coming from New Zealand and having like one singing teacher within sort of like a very large radius. I took to Zoom quite quickly to like learn from other teachers and kind of get a bit more perspective on on singing, because to
Yes.
learn new things. I think maybe it's
totally. Yeah. I was the same as you. I went on a world tour of singing teachers on at the time it was Skype. And Kim, I was getting Skypes from Kim. I was getting Skypes from a bel canto guy in New York. I had a gospel guy in Liverpool. I had an acoustic guy in London. And I was like, and so I was teaching at the time, and I would like bring all of my student problems to these, whoever I was kind of working with at the time, and run it by them, and get their kind of input. And it was just such a fun way to learn.
So, Gemma, I really like this idea of, we learn so much as teachers and as vocalists as we go along. What do you reckon that you would have loved to have known at the beginning of your singing journey? If you could, I mean, there's probably like lots, but there could be, I don't know. But what do you think would be sort of like the main one or two things that you would love to have known right at the beginning of your journey that you maybe know now that would have helped you as a singer?
I think the capacity for change that is available to you with vowel modification and manipulating acoustics. I think, I mean, on a more kind of philosophical level, like being technically excellent is still going to leave the audience cold. Like there's so much more to singing than that. And I thought if I got to the bottom of it, that it would be what I needed. And I realized then that it wasn't. I wish I didn't have to go through that. I wish I'd learned that earlier. But it just popped into my head because I'm remembering that time. But like singing in small reflective spaces a lot at the volume that I would sing at will actually deafen you. I deafened myself slightly. I actually have cochlear distortion in my right ear. So I'd like to go back and tell myself to stop singing in small rooms that are very reflective. That's a very niche. That's a niche one.
Really? You have cochlear displacement. Wow.
Yeah. So once I start singing past a certain note, like pitch in a very like reflective acoustic space, it'll just start going off. Yeah. I'll have all this distortion in my ear. So yeah, don't deafen yourself.
Like don't deafen yourself. Yeah. I get a flutter in my ear around a certain note. Like I get like it's like a butterfly is in my ear around sort of a certain sort of note.
I do. Yeah. 4Ks, they'll that really kind of upsets my ear. Don't overcook your voice before performance. I used to like before a lesson, I would be like, well, I'm going to get a 2-hour warm up in before my lesson and just insanely run things over. And that kind of almost masochistic running of things. Like nothing is changing. Nothing is going in. I'm just getting tired. I'm just singing this aria over and over again. No progress is being made, only that I get more tired. So being very slow and intentional and small about practice it was something that I wish I learned earlier as well.
That's so fantastic. I think that I love the idea of not singing in loud small spaces. I think that's definitely my favorite one. It's so true though, because I think a lot of people I think unfortunately, due to a lot of these shows where, big notes get votes, it's encouraged that like loud singing is good singing. And there's a misconception that loud singing is good singing. And then people go away and then practice in their little rooms at home and they sing just incredibly loud and forget that actually you have to practice for the space that you're in. And if you want to sing loudly, then maybe go somewhere where you can sing a bit louder, and sort of the acoustic change that needs to go on between like my room here, which is super echoey in comparison to like a church, in comparison to a big theater, and try out those different spaces. I think not just like go in full blast just because you're at home in your own four walls or in the bathroom. People like to sing really loud in the bathroom.
I know, and just bask in our own glory. It's nice sometimes.
It does have good acoustic. I must admit, it does sound really nice. But now, of course, it's not bathrooms anymore. It's like you see on TikTok about the people singing in car parks and things like that.
Oh yeah, totally.
Very in at the moment.
Haven't tried that yet.
No, neither have I. I also don't have like a stairwell. There's that wonderful
Oh,
siren in the
yes.
stairwell. It's fantastic. I'm like, I want a stairwell once I was watching those things
I
to like
know.
just, yeah, as you say, I like that bask in your own glory. But Gemma, I'd love for you to tell everyone how they can get in touch with you and how they can. I mean, the question, do you even have any openings in the Pro Vocal Artist at the moment? How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. So I have a program called Pro Vocal Artist, which is about helping singers release their own music. So there's artist development alongside vocal development and some help with social media. And there's a community of other artists, and I help with songwriting and helping you find a producer. So it's quite an involved program. Yeah, so I do that. And if you want to find out more, you can check out provocalartist.com. And yeah, you can find me on Instagram. I'm always open to a direct message on Instagram as well, or an email. So, but yeah, provocalartist.com is probably the easiest way.
Well, that's really cool. And of course, I'll put in the show notes, but you have a fantastic YouTube channel where you go through a lot of, and on your Instagram as well, you go through a lot of technical exercises, which I think is fantastic. Especially you take us through really like the specific building blocks. I really love that, especially with your mix videos that I've watched and going through step by step. And I think that's really fantastic.
Nice.
No, it's really
Thanks
awesome.
a million.
No, thank you. And thank you so much for coming on. I think it's so awesome to find different, perspectives on mixed voice. And I think, especially from someone as so experienced as qualified as yourself, to think, and you're such a freaking awesome singer as well. I think it's, oh my God, like I know even when you're doing like the bad singing in your videos, I'm like, I love it. I just think it's fantastic. But I think it's important for a lot of, for young singers to also get it from someone as experienced as yourself to say, okay, well, actually, I wish that I'd done A, B, and C, when I was starting my journey. And I think that's really, really cool. So thank you so much. It's been awesome chatting with you.
Thanks for having me.